Hello, welcome to the second episode of What is This Behavior? Thank you for tuning in to the podcast. And so, as I said, I'm going to be starting the episodes with what I've, just talking about something that I observed over the week or saw something over the week or just want to talk about something. And this Sunday, what happened was we had to go to church. And because my parents wanted to, and it had been 7 months since we've been to church, and so obviously I had to agree. It's not like I have an option. So we went about, we got dressed, we wore a mask, we got into the car, and we were on our way to church when we found out that we were late for the first one for that mass in that church. So we were like, let's go somewhere else. And so we go there, and then we find out that there are no English masses, and there's only one mass, which is much later. And so we just gave up, and we were going back home when my mom, she's a little annoyed by the fact that we couldn't go to church, says, "Oh man, all the bars are open. Why aren't the churches open?" And that was a very valid thing to ask. But then some I was listening to another podcast on the same day, and there also they spoke about how beer was invented, and how old beer and like alcohol was invented in human history. And that got me thinking, right? Humans have placed alcohol over a lot of things in history. Like the oldest records of a beer being made goes up to ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt there were papyrus records of beer being made, and it was made out of dates and pomegranates and small fruits which were available to them in the desert. And that, like, and from there how it moved on through the Middle East and to medieval Europe, right? And like even before we could even figure out one of the, like, most of the essential inventions of our day, people were like, yes, I have to get drunk, right? So which is really fascinating to me. And another interesting thing I heard in that same podcast, this is a podcast by Kumar Varun and Biswa Kalyan Rath called Too Past Too Curious. It's a history podcast, so check it out, right? So there they say that the people who used to drink beer, right, they would just end up living longer than the people who just drank water, because what would ultimately happen is the people who drank beer wouldn't die of the diseases which people would get by waterborne disease, which sort of blew my mind. How all the alcoholics in, I don't know, whatever time period they were referring to, somehow lived longer, and they were just laughing in the face of whoever was doing this whole drink healthier thing, which which is fascinating. And yeah, which is really cool. And I think we should do one whole episode about the history of alcohol, and like, because like it holds such significance in a lot of like if you go back through history, you can see the place of alcohol in religion, in society, everything. But we'll leave that for another episode, which would be really interesting. But today's episode is something of like incredible importance, right? Close to 55 to 58% of our population, the numbers, I mean, the majority of our population are farmers, but the number is sort of, like some say 54, some say 60, some say 58. So I'm just going to say more than 50, right? More than 50% of our population, right, are the ones that have to face the most amount of problems, which is sort of like, which is funny, because it, like, I mean, in a democracy, you say that like the majority sort of has a say in how the thing should go, but it's clearly not that, right? And they face so many problems, from the fact that the with the crops that they grow, the kind of the amount they invest into their occupation, all of that. And it's just a very sad situation in our country. And with the farmer bills coming in, there are 3 farm bills that have been brought in, and they've been passed, and the president has also given an assent to them. Okay. And so we're going to be talking about these things on our episode today, right? This is going to be a 2-part episode. One part is about the ecological impact of agriculture, and what we can do to fix it. That's going to be part 2. And part 1 is going to be about farmer bills and pesticide usage within this country. Okay. And today we have a very, very special guest, and he is Dr. Ramanjanayulu GV. He is an agricultural research scientist and is an executive director at Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Now, if you don't know who he is, then I would recommend you check out his TED Talks. He has three or four TED Talks actually, and one of his most famous ones are Poison on a Plate, and his most notable media appearance is on Satyamev Jayate. So if you followed that, you might be able to recognize him. But I think these are what he is most known for. But I think like the most notable accomplishments of his is what he's done for so many villages in this country, along with his team at CSA. And there are there are so many villages which he transformed. These villages were using tons of pesticides and fertilizers which are terrible for you and for the crops and for the farmers as well, right? But what their team at CSA was able to do was change that entire thing, make them zero pesticide and fertilizer. The amount of pesticides and fertilizers used, they brought it down to zero, and it's completely, it's a safe process, and it's so much more beneficial for the farmer. So we're going to be talking about a lot of these quite a few about these issues, and it's a very different perspective. Because if I wanted to call someone who knows public policy, we could have spoken to them about the farmer bills and its impact. But then people like Dr. Ramanjanayulu are the ones who are actually dealing with the farmers and will know how much this might affect them. So anyway, stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you'd like to give us feedback, or if you have any questions, or if you want us to talk about something else, make sure to follow us on Instagram, and hope you enjoy this episode. So hello and welcome to the second episode of this season of What is This Behavior? And today joining me is Dr. Raman Janayulu. So thank you for joining us on this podcast. We're really glad to have you here. And I want to just start off by talking about what you do, because someone asked me what is an agricultural research scientist. So why don't you tell us a little about what exactly that term means, and why you ended up entering this field?
At CSA, we work with farmers. CSA, Center for Sustainable Agriculture. We started it in 2004, so we are about 16 years old organization. So we work with farmers in terms of trying to solve the problems which are pushing farming into the deep crisis. So there are two levels of problems which we see. One is in the way farming is done, which cause a lot of ecological crisis, which makes say high use of chemicals, high use of water, high use of energy, and then its impact on nature, and then the impact of changes in the weather and nature on farming. So this whole debate around ecology. So looking at how ecology can be sustained. So that's one dimension of our work. Second dimension of our work is looking at farmers in Indian context. More than 55% of people depend on farming, and in that 85% of them are small and marginal. So trying to look at how their livelihoods can be sustained, because it's more about an economic sustainability kind of thing. So we try to look at from both these dimensions, and all our work is around that. So when we are trying to look at that over a period of time, while India boasts always saying is an agricultural country, and agriculture is the backbone of Indian economy and all, we never ever focused on our farmers. We never ever focused on their livelihoods. We never ever focused on our resources. And having studied agriculture for over 10 years, and then also studied Indian economy for over few years to understand, particularly during my civil services preparation stage, and having seen the bureaucracy very closely, how they take decisions and all, we thought we should have an independent research organization which can look into what needs to be done at the field level to what needs to be done at a policy level. So I would say from farm to the final policy level. So what needs to be done, and then how do we engage with various players? Because one of the things we realized is that across the country, while there are a number of alternatives tried out, both in terms of policy as well as practice, or institutions, the number of practices tried out, each one of it is in its own sphere. So it's like a silo. So farmer organizations which fight for their rights work only there. They never look into the problems with the practices. People work and the practices never look into what happens at the market, and people who work at the market and don't look into the policy like kind. So we thought there should be one organization which can understand end to end. So
and
from
sort of bridge the gap
inputs
between
farmers
all the.
needs to the final consumption side, and then we understand. See, leave aside solving the problem. First, we need to understand the problem, where problem lies. If you don't understand the problem, you cannot solve the problem. So I thought that's the approach we need to take. So problem diagnostic approach we need to take, and take a very scientific and rational approach rather than getting carried away by ideologies. Because many times what I see, both in terms of production technologies or when we talk about market philosophies or when we talk about public policy, everything is driven by ideology. Like somebody said 100 years back, this is the right way to deal with a policy, so we need that. Or somebody will say 1,000 years back, some book told that this is good, so we need to do. So these kind of stupid things are coming up. So we thought we should have an organization which can take up a rational approach to farming, which is contextual and current. So that's where CSA began as an organization.
That's perfect. And I also got to see a lot of the work that you've done, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But first, I think considering the scenario we're in this country with respect to farmers, the biggest talk is with respect to the farmer bills. Now, there is, on one aspect, there is about the legal conundrum as to how it was passed, but I don't want to deal too much into that. But I want to deal with the other aspect of it and how it's actually going to impact. And we've seen protests all over the country, and of course, the political protests aside, with the with certain politicians leaving the cabinet ministry, etc. We've seen protests in Kerala where there have been protests at 250 government centers. In Karnataka, these concerns, their highways were blocked, and they've gone all the way to the chief minister taking their grievances. So my question is this, right? So is the farmer bill bringing out any sort of reform which could, carry out any sort of change? Or is it, or is the trouble that the government has gone through to get these bills through not worth it? So what do you think about the reforms that have come into place?
See, I would say both the claims made by the government that, about the benefits this bill gets in, or the claims made by the opposition that the harm these bills will bring in, both are far-fetched. Both are not real. Because see, whatever is happening at the, whatever is supposed to happen with the bills, whatever they have written in the bills and all, many of these changes have already happened. Same if you are talking about selling outside APMC mandis, or if you are talking about contract farming, or all these have happened. So only thing which may happen is about the hoarding and the changes in the Essential Commodities Act. Right. And also we need to also understand, we cannot run a nation in 2020 which is the bills and which are or the regulations or the support systems which were created in 1950s. I think that cannot happen. But why the farmers are protesting? I think that also we need to understand. See, farmers are protesting because whatever governments, successive governments in the last 50, 60 years have promised were never delivered. Right. So there's no trust on the government. And so whatever minimal is there, let it continue. Why should you? So people prefer status quo than a change, because you created such a disaster over 60, 70 years. So people don't have any trust. Right. So whatever minimal they're getting, at least we got habituated for this. Let us fight our own lives. So you don't need to intervene in among our lives. That's what many of them feel. I think that is one thing. Second is there are also variations across the state because of the way public policy got skewed up. Right. I would say government screwed up, but that actually resulted in a lot of skewing. So there are certain states where they depend too much on APMCs, but the rest of the states, people doesn't even know where their APMCs are. Right. And for many farmers, even going to APMCs is a costly affair, so it doesn't make sense to go there. See, if you're saying 36% only sells in APMC, it doesn't mean in every state 36% are selling. In some state, if 98% are selling, obviously there are states where there's only 1% or 2% are selling, right? And so in a situation where people are unable to go to APMC mandis also, thinking that they can go to other states and sell is far-fetched. It's not going to happen. So the claims made by government is wrong there. Whereas at the same time, when it is becoming difficult for the mandis itself to go and buy from the villages in terms of aggregation, and there is a lot of unorganized communities and business persons in the villages who actually does that first mile aggregation, and that's where a lot of middle. First mile aggregation is from the farmers to the market. See, what happens is, see, any supermarket, any big player will look at having a certain volume. And to reach that volume, say if I need 1 ton of tomato, 1 ton of tomato, if a farmer harvests about 1 quintal or 2 quintals or 10 quintals, I need to aggregate from 10 farmers or 15 farmers.
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
So that is a costly affair. So that's also, there is a logistics cost, there is a issues over there kind of thing. So that part is completely in the hands of very unorganized communities, unorganized sellers. So even if you look at as a livelihoods, that's a major livelihoods in this country after farming, I would say. The unorganized sellers and buyers.
Sector, yes, yeah.
Unorganized sellers and buyers who are in the traders kind of thing. And so given that situation, I also don't think big corporations will come and replace them, because they are not their competitors. See, they don't lie there actually. So what ideally should have happened is farmers should have been organized, and then they should have handled the first mile delivery, first mile aggregation of the produce, and then government should have invested more there and then strengthened that part so that things can happen smoothly. So you can aggregate without much cost addition. Today, there is a lot of cost addition which adds there,
right?
Rather than at the later market. So that part government tried, but it didn't do well, I would say. So as a farmers cooperatives, packs, producer companies, all that dimension of the work kind of. Second, beyond APMCs, there are another 20,000 market yards which are run by government itself. Say, if you are talking about government market yards, it's not just APMCs. There are 27,000 market yards in this country. It could be a petty vegetable market to a big one. So in between, there are a number of variants kind of. And only APMCs are now talked about, but there are the rest of the 20,000 also are the market yards which are happening. So government should have focused on strengthening them also. Government should have strengthened them. It didn't do that. And as a result, there is a crisis in terms of farmers selling always. And in that situation, we need to, if private players have to be in the place, there are two important things which we need to look into. One is about, say, if a private player is not taking any support from the market yard, why should market yard start charging them? APM Mandi tax, for example. Say, we have farmers cooperatives. My farmers cooperatives aggregate from the farmers, sell in the city. But why should I pay to Mandi for the services they provide? See, if it is a tax which I need to pay on my sales, I'll pay. But if you are saying this is for the services I am offering and you don't offer any service.
So
you don't offer any service.
This particular amount they're paying to those agents who are facilitating the trade in the mandis.
No, they don't facilitate anything. That's the point I'm trying to say. So Mandi tax, if I'm selling inside the Mandi, I agree. It is required because you are creating a facility and I'm using the facility. I'm not coming to your Mandi, I'm selling outside.
But you still have to pay.
Why are you charging me? Why are you charging me? Say, it's like a college saying, since you are learning on your own, you are reading your books, you should pay me. You're not even printed the book. See, you're not even written the book. You're not given me the book. And then if you want me to pay the tax, it doesn't work, right? So Mandi tax was a problem. Second is, there is no regulation. So this bill should have actually talked about regulating this purchases outside the market yard. Because current regulation is only about people who are buying inside the market yard. So the current regulation should have talked about regulating the trade outside the market yard, and regulation should be minimal. And regulation should be minimal. See, we are in a days where we fear talking to governments because every regulation is associated with a corruption.
Corruption.
Every regulation. So right from getting a license to everything, there is a payment which need to be made. More so if it is a economic transaction. Given that it should have been a minimal regulation, like you register the buyer and then see whether they are following the fair trade practices and whether there is a transparent transparent billing and then transparent accounts being managed. I think that should have been the new legislation, and that was not the case.
Yeah, and
So
if you look
not
back at how the APMCs were brought into place, right? It was mainly to regulate this sort of trade. Now, ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong. What is happening is that if they go outside of it, they're basically going without some sort of safety net. Would you agree with that?
See, that's the point I'm trying to say. So government should have come up with that regulation. So moving out of APMCs is not a serious problem because 64% of trade happens outside APMCs already. And 22 states already amended their APMC Act.
Right.
22 states. And rest are all union territories where probably there is no trade which happens. Say Andaman Nicobar, I would say Lakshadweep. So there's not much production over there. So I don't think this will have such a serious impact.
Okay.
The impact would be because you are not having any fair mechanism of regulation. That's a point which we need to remember. Second, because of the variance between the states, so Punjab, Haryana, where the mandi tax is very high, there is a threat that the traders within the mandi also may move out. Okay. Because the mandi tax is very high there. Say in Telangana, mandi tax is only 1%. Maharashtra mandi tax is 0%. Whereas Punjab, Haryana, mandi tax is 7% or 8%. So it's a state which should deal with that. So that's another issue which came up. And coming to what will happen to the farmers. See, today, anyway, the small and marginal farmers are selling to the outsiders. So if there are more buyers, obviously the choice will be more. And that can only happen in two conditions. One, farmers should have a bargaining power. Okay. And farmers can have a bargaining power only whether it is based on their quality or a quantity. So quality will come in if they can manage it better and then they know what variety they're growing, how they're growing, that kind of thing. Or in terms of aggregation so that I have enough quantity so that I can bargain my thing. See, if there's no quantity or quality, bargaining is not going to happen anyway. So more focus, more discussion should happen around that. And then how do we create that part? Because without doing that, if government comes up and say, I'm opening up market, it makes no sense. And then more money actually will go there actually.
Right. You're basically creating a whole new system, which would at the end of the day still be ineffective, and to create it at a...
Exactly. It will be like, say, private colleges and private healthcare system in India. When they started, they said it will be very efficient and then they will provide all the services. Finally, they ended up living on the government subsidies. Take out the fee reimbursement in this country, no engineering college is going to survive.
Correct.
I think less than 20% of the colleges are going to survive if you remove the fee reimbursement. Remove the CGHS and other healthcare support from the government. I think all hospitals will get closed.
System will collapse. Yeah.
Hospitals will survive. So that's the point. So tomorrow the private companies also will do the same thing. So they will take all the money from the governments and then they will spend in the name of building the infrastructure, in the name of providing services. But basically they will be using the public money. So rather than that, if the money has been invested in the public institutions, but public institutions, the problem is about the corruption. So without addressing that corruption issue, and without addressing the discrepancies in the existing system, and also in terms of, like I said, the inequity between states. Say, some states have all infrastructure, some states doesn't have infrastructure at all. Some states procure almost 90%, some states doesn't procure even 1%. So if that's kind of skewed, priorities are there between states and also between crops. The crisis is going to continue, whatever law you bring in.
Correct. So the approach is rather ill-informed and sort of like you've not looked at the actual issues.
It's an ecosystem you look at. So Talking about just one or two changes and then seeing and expecting that they will bring in changes in everything makes no sense. And the more we create vested interest for status quo, crisis is going to continue, and then government won't, we are not even engaging the government in a dialogue. What changes we want? We always want a status quo. Some want what is 60 years back, some want what is 3,000 years back. That's the only debate in this country, right? Beyond that, there's no discussion at all. Yeah, so that's the point.
That's pretty interesting, because not a lot of people understand that, you can't just like, it needs to be a more specific approach, a state-wise approach, because of the discrepancies, etc.
That's what Constitution said. So Constitution actually
it falls under the state list, agriculture.
State-wise approach you need to take. So center has no role. So it's a state which should decide. And state didn't do anything. And whatever they did, it's only on paper. So
it's just a few states that have actually brought about any changes to the APMC. I think Maharashtra was a little ahead in that.
To be innovative and adapt to the changing scenarios. See, you also need to adapt to the changing scenarios, right?
Correct. But yeah, thank you for your thoughts on the Farmers Bill. This is a little different approach, because if I go online, because I was reading up a little on the Farmers Bill, and you get to see like the debate is mainly focused on the APMCs, but it's completely ignoring the remainder of the part, like how many people are actually using these APMCs, and I think the bigger picture is sort of lost out. But I want to talk about another issue that the CSA has dealt with, and that is the pesticides usage in this country. Certain statistics say that 75% of the pesticides that we use are hazardous to human beings and to the entire
100%.
Environment.
Why 75? 100%.
100%. Okay.
100%.
Yeah. And you said a couple of times in your TED Talks that only 1% of these pesticides work, right? And taking these statistics, keeping in mind the harms, and it's not that there is a lack of literature on the amount of the health impacts of pesticides. There is still, the usage continues, and the fertilizer and pesticides industry is merely growing. What is the reason for this, and why aren't people like open to the possibility that there can be pesticide free farming, and this is something that's proven as well? So what are the factors that are allowing for this industry to boom, and why is it that we cannot let go of pesticides?
Three important facts we need to understand here. One, when I said pesticides are harmful, pesticide is a chemical which kills.
Right.
It's a chemical which kills, and then all human bodies, every living being has the same nervous system, same physical body system. So whatever harm insects are facing, it's the same thing which happens to the human bodies also. It's just a dosage difference. So you may need a little bit more compared to the insect, because insect is very small. So that's all. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's the same impact which all of us are going to face. I think that's the first fact we need to remember. Second thing is, you may be facing, in a farm of 1 acre, if you are seeing, 1,000 insects, 1,000 insects, and you are spraying a pesticide on that.
Right.
How much of the insecticide will actually fall on the insect, and then will kill it? Rest of it is in the air and water and the soil, and then food, right? And then all that comes back into your food chain, because whatever falls onto the ground or whatever remains in the air, when it rains, it goes onto the ground, and then it gets into the groundwater. Groundwater gets mixed up. So you and I may see that boundaries, but the groundwater won't have that boundary. So obviously it gets mixed up. Similarly, if around Hyderabad, if it rains, all those villages where water rains is what comes into the water bodies, and then that water body is what supplies water to the Hyderabad. Similarly, it will be the case with Bangalore. So all the catchment area of Bangalore, if it rains, that's what comes into your water, right?
Correct.
You may clean it up, but what you clean, you won't clean your chemicals, right? You will only clean up the microbials.
Yeah.
So you're actually spoiling your own resources. Second, whether they can actually kill insects. If we see from that point of view, whether they kill insects. Obviously, as a killing tool, what we have seen over a period of time and then learned is, the more you try to kill, they develop resistance faster.
Okay.
Because you're actually building a selection pressure in them. This is selection pressure, because say if there are 100 insects, so if there are 100 insects, if if none of them is resistant, first generation, second generation, 100 will, but the third generation, one of them will survive because they have to survive.
Correct.
If there is a variance, in the insects, if some have strength and then some are susceptible, you are killing the susceptible ones, and then you are actually choosing the resistant ones, right?
Wow.
So you're actually killing the resistant.
You're leaving the strongest ones, which can cause more harm to you.
Which cause more harm to you,
Right.
and then you are also removing all the natural enemies which eat them. So you're actually, by your action, you're removing the natural enemies. You are also killing the weaker ones. So you are left with only stronger ones, and that's by your action. So this anyway will not solve your problem. So the pest management, largely globally now understood that moving away from killing action is the only way you can deal with pest. Killing action is what has created the whole problem. Right. So that's a fundamental new science of management, which people are able to articulate as a new science. Unfortunately, we are not doing that in India. We always feel some pesticide which were brought in 30 years back, 40 years back should still continue, because that pesticide company has an interest. So like the policies we discussed, it's the same story. Whoever has a vested interest, they want that to continue. So status quo maintenance has a vested interest, and then they want that to continue. So if endosulfan is banned globally, after 25 years also, India wants to continue with that. Monocrotophos is banned globally, still India wants to continue with that also. Even if glyphosate is not recommended to be used in crops, people want to use it, and then people sell to use it, kind of thing. But whenever we discuss about this one, we always blame farmers. See, we always blame farmers that they are illiterate, they are unable to understand this kind of thing. See, in our daily, if you see from morning to evening in the urban houses, at least I would list out 50 products which are very harmful to the environment and partly harmful to you also, and which have no utility at all, or least utility, which have better alternatives. But we don't do that. We just get carried away by the advertisements. I can name it fairness creams. I can name in mosquito repellents. I can go on listing out like that. All of you are lured by the advertisements, right? All of us know this doesn't work. All of us get lured by that. So similar way, farmers also get lured. So it's about a right decision-making behavior which we need to create. Unfortunately, rather than creating that decision-making behavior in the farmers, we end up actually as a fight, as an ideological fight, whether pesticides are required or not required. See, basically, if a farmer is faced with a pest problem, how to deal with that is their question.
Right.
So how do you build their knowledge and then build their decision-making behavior so that they can take a right decision over there? It's a very important issue. It's not a fight between companies and NGOs which are opposing it. It's basically, for a farmer, they need a solution.
Correct. And the pesticides companies are giving it to them. Yeah.
So they see a hope there. See, the problem is the people who are opposing it is not giving any solution. They tell you,
don't use it, but they won't tell you what to do instead.
They tell you how to deal with it. So that's the point I'm saying. Say, if I'm facing with the problem, am I actually understanding the problem? Am I trying to solve the problem? See, everyone, when faced with a problem, it is their problem.
Correct.
So either you need to make them understand and solve their problem, or give them a solution. So if you're not doing anything, then obviously they don't listen to you. So that's what was happening all the time. So what we try to do is, can we shift the cart and then try to work with the farmers in terms of improving their decision-making behavior, understand their ecosystem, understand management systems in a better way, so that they don't depend on external source for knowledge.
Right.
See,
so external sources. So these pesticides companies are creating that sort of awareness, etc. And I mean, it's not awareness.
Not only pesticide industry, it's also public extension system. See, it's also public extension. What did they create all the 60 years? If you look at all the recommendations they made, it's basically an information piece which you give. If this is the pest, you spray this one. Why to spray or why the problem came in, nobody tells them. Nobody. So you never trusted the farmer's knowledge that they can also think and then they can also deal with that.
Right. So
See,
it's
so new
already
knowledge comes
assumed that
in,
they don't know anything. So this
they
is
don't
what
know
we're telling
anything.
you,
Yeah.
do
So,
this,
yeah,
right?
they
So
don't know
there's no
anything.
confidence.
So
Yeah.
that's it. Yes. So built on what they already know.
Mhm.
See, each one of us have our own knowledge and skills based on where we have brought up.
Correct.
So any new knowledge and new skill should be imparted to us, certainly. It is not about displacement, right? What you know
Right.
already, on that, how do I add on so that you can do better? What happened all these years is that we always, everybody blames only farmers. So either it's a pesticide, modern science also blames farmers for their illiteracy, and then people who promote alternatives also blame farmers
Right.
for the using the pesticides kind of. It's a
Mhm.
desperation. See, I'm facing with a problem, so this is the least best alternate which I see from a
Right.
farmer point of view. So that's the situation.
Correct. And I think even government subsidies, even as recent as March 2020, you have subsidies coming in for the kind of pesticides being used. So
Fertilizers. The
the
pesticides are, fortunately in India, pesticides are not very subsidized.
okay,
Um,
but
Only
fertilizers are.
fertilizers are subsidized in this country. Yeah.
All right.
Chemical
all right.
fertilizer.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode. Part 2 of this episode will be coming out pretty soon. All right, stay tuned and make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this video and share it with all of your friends. Tell them about the farmer bills. Look at this is a completely different perspective, so make sure they listen to it and watch the video. And make sure to support us on Instagram. The handle is @texit.podcast. You can also, if you prefer listening to the to an audio podcast, make sure to head over to Spotify. You can head over to Breaker. You can head over to Apple Podcasts. You can go to Google Podcasts. We're on all platforms. We're also currently on Amazon Music as well. So if you prefer the audio version, make sure to listen to it over there. And stay tuned for more episodes. And until we come out with the next episode, make sure to listen to our previous episodes. Our latest episode is about the Premier League, so make sure to check that out as well, and stay tuned for better content. Thank you.